let's start off here, everybody. We want you to get a pen and paper ready because we're going to give you some really awesome content specifically on how to get out of this mess that we have talked about. We call it together the 5CR model, and we called it that because it's going to make it easy for you to remember the 5 C's and the R that we need to get out of this mess. So the first C is competence. So Jim, why don't we talk a little bit about why having an important skill base is so important in order for you to be self-reliant?
Well, let's just look at, let's say our neighborhood, whatever neighborhood you live in, is all of a sudden the only part of the world you've got to worry about, all right? Mm-hmm. In your neighborhood, you've got, let's say somehow so that the illustration works, you're protected from all the rest of the world for the short term. And so all you've got to do is worry about the welfare of the people within 1 mile of your own front door. Okay. Now, they know that too, so all of you look to each other now as the only society that you have to deal with for the moment, okay? And you have a community meeting. So all these people get together and you say, okay, what's our goal? And someone speaks up and they say, our goal is to be able to survive and do well and live pleasant lives for the indefinite future, for as long as we can. Great. What are we going to need? Food, shelter, defense, da-da-da-da-da-da, right? We're going to need all the fundamentals of human existence, all right? So what do we do for food? I don't know. Who's good at food? Ray says, well, I got a garden. I can not only produce from my garden, I can show you how to do a garden in your own yard. Cool. Ray's the food chairman for the moment. Not forever. He's not the commissar of food. Ray's the food chairman for the moment. Okay. We need defense because there's wild animals and scary things out there. Okay, Jim's got weapons and knows how to use them. Good. He's in charge of teaching us all how to develop weapons and use weapons wisely, how to defend ourselves. Okay, Paula's good with money. She knows how to teach us how to record what we have that's valuable now, how to manage it and share it and circulate it in the ways that make sense. Great. Okay. Who's in charge of water? Who's in charge of buildings, and who's in charge of building supplies? And should we agree not to do certain types of activities because that would diminish the resources for the other people? Like you don't pee in the water supply, right? Things like that. What are we going to do about waste? What are we going to do about nutrition and so forth? How about educating our kids? Who's good at that? Okay, I can teach them how to make their bed. I can teach them how to add and subtract. I can teach them how to communicate and how to write and read. So all of a sudden we start sharing these skills, not because we want Ray to become the food specialist and advance his career. We all want to become good with food. And so Ray is teaching. And what's the goal of teaching? To make me self-reliant as it relates to that subject, food. Mm-hmm. Okay, so everyone's learning all of the skills. You could call this cross-training in a company, right? So everyone's learning to be, now not everyone's learning to be as good at food as Ray is, but we're learning from Ray so that we can become good enough to get by and maybe excellent later on. So we start sharing all these skills and acquiring the competence, the skill set to survive and contribute to others. Because if I'm self-reliant, I have something to give. Like the story of the Good Samaritan. Well, if the Good Samaritan had been a dependent, emotionally bankrupt drug addict, the Good Samaritan would never have been remembered because he wouldn't have been in a position to help somebody else. You've got to get your own act together first. That's why on the airplane, when there's an emergency and the oxygen masks fall, they say, put your own mask on first. Well, no, my kids, I want to save my kids. Yeah, but if you're not breathing, you're not going to be able to help them. So get some oxygen, self-reliant, then help the person next to you. Well, I don't want to come first. You got to come first. You're the only resource you've got. So learn to get your own act together. Competence, competence, competence. Become skilled. Yeah, but at what? As many things as are reasonable. Become good with money. Become good with nutrition. Become good with health and fitness. Become good with health care. Be able to fix injuries and illnesses and things like that without having to go to a doctor or hospital. Okay? Become good with basic supplies for daily living. Become good, etc. That's the whole point of competence as number one, and without number one, never mind the rest of them. Would you agree with that part, Ray?
Oh, I absolutely agree. If you don't have a skill set that you can leverage to be able to take care of yourself and those that you care about, you're basically a sitting duck in the water, and you're not going anywhere, because competence is the starting point for everything. So
Yeah.
for those watching this video, I really would encourage you to take some of the items that Jim has mentioned here and add to that list. What are the areas of your life and in your business that you have determined that you need to increase your skill set in, and objectively evaluate where are you right now, what's the gap from where you need to go, so that you do not feel that you are dependent to a large degree on others. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you need to be a master of everything and not be able to barter and connect with others. You need to pick what it is that you want to be amazing at and figure out what you're willing to trade to benefit from other people's specialties, coming back to Jim's example.
You bet. And learn critical thinking. Learn basic math, basic science, and physics and biology. Just learn the fundamentals that they used to make an important part of the school curriculum, so that you know enough to know how to solve a problem, fix a broken tool, take the appropriate action in an emergency.
And I would add to that, when we think about critical thinking, anytime you hear somebody say something to you, whether it's on television, the newspaper, popular media, or videos that you're watching, just like this one, stop first and analyze it and understand what's the basis from which they're speaking from, what is truth versus reality, and verify and fact check, because many times I think we tend to believe what we're told, and that can have a cascading spin-off effect of dominoes that take you down different roads that you may not want to go down.
And you need to ask questions like, is what they just said fact or opinion? If it's opinion, that it may be fine, but who's shaping their opinion? What resources or sources or what mentors are they turning to get the guidance that causes them to form that opinion? So you need to learn independent thinking and then find mentors, but for heaven's sakes, have more than one input. If everything you get from NBC News, shame on you. If everything you get from Fox News, shame on you. If everything you get is from the National Association for the non-victimization of people that we don't agree with, shame on you. Get multiple sources of input and then make decisions based on what in your heart and soul you believe is right and true. Not what mom or dad told you was right or true, but what, after analysis and critical thought, you've been able to arrive at that conclusion on your own. It's like in a religion. If you go to, let's say, the Baptist church, and all your life you hear the Baptist church point of view, that's fine. It may be right for you. But somebody years later, they say, why do you believe this? All you can do is quote the other people. If you didn't go through the thought process on your own, if you didn't go back and read the gospel, that they're preaching from on your own, and do your own thought and prayer about it and come to your own conclusions, you don't have a belief. You got a memorization. You're reciting their poem instead of stating your beliefs.
That's about being an independent and active thinker in your life for interpreting the world around you. And one thing I'd also add to what we've just said so far is learning to understand motive. What's the motive behind the message and who you're hearing it from? What motivates them, and where does that motive come from? And trace motive. And then if you do that, in many cases, you'll be able to separate what is factual and can benefit you, and what is not and has an angle that is being presented to you. So I think that's important too.
I think you're right. So number two in our formula is confidence. So how does one build confidence?
I think one of the big ways in which we build confidence is directly related to what we just talked about, which is building competence. Once we are competent and we know that we're competent and we know a lot about a subject, it really helps us in being confident. And And we were just talking about this also just before the interview, being able to have great public speaking and communication skills to be able to stand up and articulate yourself on what you're passionate about, what you're competent about, really can help with confidence. What do you think there, Jim?
Well, I think a perfect example of that is the Dale Carnegie Institution. Dale Carnegie, back in at the end of the Depression, was teaching public speaking skills at the YMCA's, and people were flocking to it because it had such a powerful impact on their ability to do what they did day to day. Their confidence ended up being the great output, not their public speaking. Public speaking was simply a process through which they developed the underlying strength, which is confidence in their ability to stand and communicate and deal with things. See, when you learn to speak to other people effectively, there's a lot going on there besides just the speaking. First off, you have to have a thinking or a belief or something that you're trying to express. Then you've got to turn that into words. Then you've got to figure out how to get those words across to other people in a way that they would hear it and understand it right and be affected by it in the right way. So it's not just about articulating it, it's about interpreting it in a way that your listeners will be affected in the appropriate way, whether it's motivated or moved or touched or reminded or educated or whatever it happens to be. So using public speaking as a medium to develop personal confidence to deal with the world is a very, very, very good tool. My grandson, who I mentioned earlier, age 13, has acquired black belt status in Taekwondo, a martial art. Well, he had to go through so many steps, awkwardly, poorly, making mistakes, getting injured occasionally, not in big ways, but dealing with all of that to get to the point where he qualified for a higher belt, that his confidence is huge compared to what it used to be. Plus, he doesn't feel as afraid when there are threatening-looking people around him. He knows he can handle himself. Same thing's true for the public speaking when it's coming to handling yourself communication-wise.
So when we think about public speaking, we just talked about it's not just what you say, but how you say it, and being able to demonstrate and communicate a point of view that holds your audience's attention. So ultimately, it's the end result of a lot of other preparation work that has gone into being able to deliver that message. So as a takeaway,
it can't be learned independent of the action. It can only be truly learned. It can be understood independent of the action, but it can only be learned through actually doing it in front of people. Whereas Taekwondo is another good example of that, or karate, or any of the other disciplines. They can only be learned through the doing of it, not the study of it. Study of it precedes the doing. But the doing it's like years ago in San Diego, Steve Lewandowski, a friend of mine, a colleague, who's an announcer, or at the time was an announcer for polo matches. He said, "Have you ever been to a polo match?" "Never have." He said, "Well, come to Del Mar, to the polo grounds. We're having a match and I'm announcing, and you can come as my guest." Cool. So Paula and I went, and he even acknowledged me over the loudspeaker, which was kind of cool. And we watched this wonderful polo match. And then later he said, "Have you ever taken a polo lesson?" I said, "Oh, heavens, no." He said, "Well, take one." And I said, "Well, no, no." And he said, "No, Jim, take one." And I said, "Okay." So I go to the corral where they have the horses, and I meet the instructor, and he says, "Okay, get on the horse." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about polo. I've never had, are we going to go over the basic?" He said, "Get on the horse." I said, "But I need to learn the fundamental." He said, "Get on the horse." Okay, so I get on the horse. He said, "Here's a helmet, put it on. Here's a mallet," or whatever they call that. And he said, "Now ride your horse out into the arena." I said, "But wait, I don't know anything." He said, "Jim, you learn polo by doing. Let me explain. Here's what you're going to do. Now, come this way and do it." And within like 5 minutes, I was riding the horse and actually hitting the whatever they call the polo ball. I was actually doing that within 5 minutes of arrival. Good heavens. And I went on for an hour, and I learned many things in that hour. And then, we gave the horse a rest and got my little annoying self off his back. And I stood there bow-legged and said, wow, that was amazing. But the point is, there's no way to learn polo without being on a horse in a polo match.
So the key point that we're driving home here is, one is to have the competence of what to do. The second part is to use the competence and actually do it. And the third thing we talked about in one of our examples here was public speaking. I would just throw in an example here on the Taekwondo. I actually used to be a Taekwondo student as well. And there's a very big difference between learning your katas and your patterns and how you fight in the dojo and actually going into a sparring match where you have to apply it with somebody who is using the same technology, so to speak, against you. It's a total different game. It's the same thing with driving a car. Think back when you first drove a car, and you can know, conceptually speaking, got to put on the gas, the foot on the pedal, steer the wheel. Do you remember being white-knuckled and be like,
I was learning on a standard shift, so I had the clutch to deal with and all that. I was terrified.
So the key takeaway, everybody, we talked about competence and confidence, and getting confidence comes from doing.